While so many people are yelling at their TVs, painting their faces, and feeling crushed because a group of strangers lost a game, there's also a huge number of people who honestly couldn't care less. And neuroscience suggests their brains may actually work in a different way. Stick with me, because what I'm about to explain might totally change how you look at the sports-obsessed people around you. Here's the part no one really talks about. Not being into sports doesn't make you dull. It doesn't mean you don't have passion, and it absolutely doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. But there is something interesting going on in your brain that sets you apart from the roughly 60% of Americans who follow sports like a religion. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do so many people care so deeply? Humans are naturally tribal. For most of history, belonging to a group was necessary for survival. Your tribe kept you safe from danger, helped you find food, and made sure you stayed alive. And sports? They're basically modern tribes, just with nicer logos and merch. When someone watches their favorite team, their brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the same one involved in family love. Pretty wild, right? Their brain actually convinces them that these wealthy athletes are part of their own group. But this is where things get interesting. People who don't fixate on sports often have what psychologists describe as lower tribal instincts. Their sense of identity isn't as closely tied to group membership. They tend to be more independent. They're more likely to think, I don't need to be part of something bigger to feel whole. And there's real research backing this up. A study from 2019 found that people with little interest in sports showed far less us versus them thinking. In simple terms, they don't automatically dislike the other team just because it's not theirs. But it gets even stranger. What actually happens in the brain of a hardcore sports fan during a game can be genuinely concerning. You know that excited feeling right before you open a gift? That buildup? That's dopamine activating in your brain. Sports fans experience that same rush while watching games. Every play, every moment of possession. Small, constant bursts of anticipation and reward. It's truly addictive. Brain scans using fMRI show that watching your team lights up the same reward centers as gambling and other highly engaging behaviors. And here's the key part. The uncertainty is what makes it so intense. You never know if your team will win. That unpredictability keeps dopamine flowing. This is called intermittent reinforcement. It's considered the most addictive reward pattern in psychology. It's the same reason slot machines are so hard to resist. The process closely mirrors other forms of behavioral addiction. Your brain doesn't really care where dopamine comes from. It just knows it wants more. People who aren't into sports, their dopamine systems simply don't react to secondhand competition. And this difference might be genetic. Research from the University of Chicago suggests that variations in dopamine receptor genes can influence how much someone enjoys watching competitive events. Think about that for a second. Your total lack of concern over whether the Lakers win or lose might actually be written into your DNA. But there's more to it. Sports fans often experience something called basking in reflected glory. When their team wins, they say, "We won." When the team loses, they say, "They lost." Did you notice that shift in language? People who don't obsess over sports are less likely to do this kind of psychological distancing. They tend to have a more stable sense of who they are. They don't rely on outside victories to feel successful. Their self-esteem is steadier and less tied to outcomes they can't control. Now, before anyone gets upset, I'm not saying one way of being is better than the other. What I am saying is that these psychological differences are real, and they're fascinating to understand. Here's something that might sound surprising. Sports fans often score higher on certain measures of empathy. They practice caring deeply about other people's struggles, even when those people are strangers wearing a team jersey. So why don't non-sports people feel that same level of empathy toward athletes? It comes down to how empathy is distributed. Everyone has a limited amount of emotional energy. People who aren't into sports often focus that empathy elsewhere, on social issues, close relationships, creative work, or intellectual pursuits. A study from 2021 found that people with low interest in sports scored much higher in openness to experience and appreciation for art and beauty. They find their emotional highs through art, music, nature, and ideas. Their brains are still searching for reward, meaning, and connection. They're just finding it in different places. Sports fans often form one-sided emotional bonds with teams and players. People who aren't into sports usually prefer putting their emotional energy into places where there's real give and take, where their involvement actually matters, and where they're active participants instead of observers. Neither approach is better than the other. They're simply different ways of moving through life. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who studied optimal experience, found that flow states, those moments when you're completely absorbed, can come from countless activities. For some people, that flow comes from watching sports. For others, it comes from almost anything else. And let's be honest about another part of this. For some people, not caring about sports can act as a kind of self-protection. Maybe they were teased or bullied in gym class. Maybe sports culture made them feel left out. Maybe they push back against the aggressive competitiveness that often surrounds sports fandom. Or maybe they never understood why grown adults yell at a TV over a ball. Your lack of interest might have a story behind it. Or maybe you just find sports boring. Both are completely valid. But here's the piece that explains why sports fans and non-sports fans often struggle to understand each other. It all comes down to how meaning is experienced. Sports fans tend to find meaning through narrative, the underdog, the comeback, the dynasty, the rivalry. It works because it's unpredictable, real-life drama with real consequences. People who don't care about sports often see that randomness as pointless. They wonder why they should emotionally invest in an outcome they can't control, performed by people they don't know, in a game that has no real impact on their actual life. And they're not wrong. But sports fans aren't wrong either. These are just two different ways of satisfying the human need for story and meaning. One group finds epic storytelling in a championship run. The other finds it in a book, a relationship, a creative project, or a scientific breakthrough. Researchers describe this difference as parasocial investment versus direct engagement. And here's something especially interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often say they feel more present in their own lives. They're not spending hours each week living through someone else's struggle. They're focused on their own. There's something quietly radical about that. So what does all of this mean? If you don't care about sports, you're not missing some essential human experience. You're just wired differently. Your reward system, your tribal instincts, your empathy, they're all tuned in another way. And that's completely fine. The next time someone asks if you watched the game and you truly couldn't care less, remember this. You're not broken. You're not boring. You're just playing a different game. One that might even have higher stakes.